What if I told you there's a forgotten genocide buried in history? One so horrific that even today, Germany struggles to fully acknowledge it. From forced marches through deserts to deadly concentration camps, the story of the Herero and Nama genocide is one of unspeakable cruelty, resistance, and survival. Stay tuned as we uncover the forgotten genocide Germany doesn't want you to know about. In the early months of 1904, tensions reached a breaking point between the German Empire and the Herero people of Southwest Africa, present-day Namibia. This conflict marked one of the most harrowing chapters in the history of colonial radicalism. Under the leadership of Samuel Maharero, the Herero rose in defiance against German domination, only to be met with a brutal military campaign. The subsequent events led to the near annihilation of the Herero population, now recognized as one of the earliest genocides of the 20th century. It is a tale of resistance, endurance, and the catastrophic impact of imperial oppression. Rewinding to late 1484, two caravels quietly departed from Lisbon Harbor, embarking on a daring voyage that would redefine European exploration. These vessels, commanded by Diogo Chao, were dispatched by King João II of Portugal to chart uncharted territories along Africa's southern coast in pursuit of a maritime route to India and China. Inspired by his predecessor, Prince Henry the Navigator, King João sought to advance Portugal's exploratory ambitions. On a prior expedition in 1482, Chao had reached the Congo River but failed to navigate beyond Africa's imposing expanse. This time, his resolve was strengthened. Navigating along the verdant coastlines of West Africa, Chao's ships passed the Niger Delta and the Congo River's mouth before pushing further south to Angola's shores. These explorations uncovered natural harbors that would later serve as pivotal hubs for Portugal's expanding slave trade. The journey continued into harsher terrains, transitioning from lush green landscapes to the stark, arid expanses of the Namib Desert, a daunting environment unlike anything the Portuguese had encountered. In this desolate yet strikingly unique region, Chao's crew became the first Europeans to set foot in modern-day Namibia. Before disembarking, the explorers erected one of their 3 stone markers, or padros, brought from Lisbon. Inscribed with the Portuguese coat of arms and a dated claim, these markers symbolize Portugal's assertion of dominion. However, the severe environment and lack of exploitable resources deterred Portuguese settlers, leaving the region untouched for centuries. It wasn't until 1893 that another European power unearthed one of these markers, ushering in an era of foreign dominance in the Namib. Long before European incursions, the San people, also known as the Bushmen, thrived in the Namibian region. Their legacy is etched in the form of intricate rock art scattered across caves and mountain ranges, offering glimpses into their ancient existence. By the 17th century, Bantu-speaking pastoralists had migrated southward, bringing livestock and new cultural practices. Among them were the Herero, who established themselves on the Central Plateau, renowned for its fertile grazing lands. Governed by matrilineal chiefs, the Herero had no centralized monarchy. By the late 18th century, their population swelled to approximately 40,000, solidifying their dominance over the plateau. In the early 19th century, the Nama people, a mixed-race community of Khoisan and Dutch descent, migrated northward into the Namib. These formidable warriors had integrated Dutch weaponry and horse riding techniques into their way of life, fostering a unique and resilient culture. Their arrival brought trade, innovation, and new methods of warfare to the region. Germany's colonial ambitions emerged in the late 19th century following its unification as a major European power. Initially without overseas colonies, Germany sought to expand its influence. The turning point came on April 10, 1883, when a German vessel anchored at Ungar a remote bay on Africa's southwestern coast. Heinrich Vogelsang, a German merchant representative, ventured inland to Bethany, the home of the Nama leader, Captain Joseph Fredericks. With the aid of a German missionary interpreter, Vogelsang orchestrated a dubious treaty granting Germany territorial rights over Ungar and its surrounding areas in exchange for firearms and nominal payment. By May 12, 1883, the German flag flew over the territory, marking the dawn of Germany's colonial foothold in Africa. The Berlin Conference of 1884 further legitimized German claims, resulting in the creation of German Southwest Africa. Imperial Commissioner Dr. Heinrich Göring, tasked by Chancellor Otto von Bismarck, implemented protection treaties to quietly extend German control over the region's land and resources under the guise of mutual alliances. By mid-September 1885, Heinrich Göring and his modest team embarked on a journey from Walvis Bay to the Herero capital of Okahanja, arriving on October 3rd. There, they met Chief Maharero Chimuaha, who was deeply entangled in a territorial conflict with the formidable Nama leader, Captain Hendrik Witbooi. Although initially reluctant, Chimuaha ultimately agreed to sign a so-called protection treaty with Göring. This agreement, however, alienated the German Empire from the Nama, particularly the Witbooi faction, making any future alliances with them improbable. Captain Hendrik Witbooi, a charismatic and resilient leader, would later emerge as one of the most tenacious adversaries of German colonial rule. As disputes between the Herero and Nama intensified, Göring's delegation found themselves powerless to intervene, reduced to mere spectators as Witboi's forces launched repeated raids on Herero settlements. These attacks exposed the ineffectiveness of the German-Herero alliance. Frustrated by this alliance's failure, Chief Chimuaha renounced the treaty in October 1888, expelling Göring and all Germans from Herero lands. In response, Otto von Bismarck dispatched seasoned Commander Kurt von Francois with a mission to solidify Germany's grasp on the region. Tasked with expanding German control through force, von Francois provoked the Herero by constructing a fort along their key trade route and seizing their supplies. Provocations aimed to spark a conflict severe enough to compel Berlin to send reinforcements, as any massacre of German troops would be politically untenable for Bismarck. By late 1889, von Francois' gamble bore fruit, and Bismarck reluctantly authorized the deployment of an additional 41 soldiers to bolster the colony. Meanwhile, tensions among the Herero reached a boiling point. At a council held in Okahanja, the community debated launching an harm on the German fort. Samuel Maharero, the ambitious son of the aging Chief Chimuaha, advocated for aggressive action, but his father, perceiving the Nama as a greater threat, prioritized the ongoing conflict with Witboi's forces. Following Chimuaha's death in 1890, Samuel Maharero ascended to leadership, inheriting a landscape rife with internal divisions and external threats. Sensing a strategic advantage, von Francois relocated Germany's military headquarters to Windhoek, a fertile valley between Herero and Nama territories. This move, viewed as an encroachment on both people's lands, heightened regional tensions. Alarmed by Germany's growing influence, Hendrik Witbooi penned numerous letters to African chiefs, urging them to resist signing protection treaties and unite against the colonial threat. Despite his warnings, most leaders remained fixated on local rivalries, underestimating the long-term implications of German expansion. By 1893, von Francois, frustrated by his inability to subdue the Nama, launched a surprise assault on Witboi's encampment at Hornkrantz. Under cover of darkness, German troops attacked indiscriminately, unaliving women, children, and the elderly. Although the raid was brutal, Witbooi regrouped and waged a series of successful guerrilla campaigns, dealing significant blows to German forces. These defeats prompted Berlin to replace von Francois with Commander Theodor Leutwein, who adopted a more nuanced approach. Leutwein, a soldier and diplomat, sought to stabilize the region through a blend of military force and strategic treaties. While exploitative, his agreements were less overtly oppressive than standard colonial pacts. Rather than seizing extensive lands, he aimed to entrench local communities within Germany's economic and military sphere. His approach with Witbooi involved months of respectful correspondence, attempting to persuade the Nama leader to accept German protection. When diplomacy failed, Leutwein launched a calculated assault in August 1894, compelling Witbooi to sign a peace treaty by September 9th. Though Leutwein's efforts brought a semblance of peace to the colony, German settlers criticized his leniency, perceiving his terms as overly generous. Meanwhile, racial tensions in Windhoek escalated, fueled by the growing affluence of leaders like Samuel Maharero and Hendrik Witbooi, who had leveraged colonial negotiations to their advantage. The German colonial military, known as the Schutztruppe, fostered hostility toward the indigenous population, engaging in widespread abuse and radicalism. One notable incident involved Lieutenant Walter Jobst, whose provocation of the Bondelswarts Nama clan led to the unaliving of their chief. In retaliation, the Bondelswarts unalived Jobst and 2 German soldiers. Leutwein responded by declaring war on the Bondelswarts, leading a grueling 500-mile march to suppress the rebellion. In the northern Herero territories, Leutwein entrusted Lieutenant Ralph Zern, an aggressive Schutztruppe officer, with maintaining order. This decision, however, proved disastrous. At Okahanja, the residence of Chief Samuel Maherero, tensions between the Herero and German settlers continued to escalate, driven by disputes over land and Germany's relentless encroachment. These simmering hostilities reached a breaking point on January 12, 1904. The town lay eerily silent. Inside a heavily fortified building, around 30 German soldiers and settlers nervously stood guard, clutching their rifles as they scanned the surroundings. Days earlier, a local Boer trader had warned Lieutenant Ralph Zern about a group of approximately 300 armed Herero men traveling toward Okahanja. The news sent shockwaves through the German community, who interpreted the movement as the prelude to an insurrection. Acting hastily, Zern ordered settlers to abandon their homes and take refuge within the fortress. For 2 agonizing days, the settlers and soldiers anxiously monitored the town, anticipating an harm that never came. On January 12th, 2 senior settlers volunteered to investigate. What they observed deepened their unease. A group of about 100 Herero men saddling their horses. Believing this was preparation for a raid, the settlers returned to the fortress, urgently reporting the perceived threat. Without verifying the situation, Zern sent an urgent telegram to Berlin, declaring that an uprising was underway. Moments later, shots rang out from the fortress, sparking chaos in the streets of Okahanja. In retaliation, the Herero besieged the fortress and launched an harm on the German quarter, ransacking homes, destroying shops, and dismantling railway tracks to delay reinforcements from Windhoek. The war had begun, yet it stemmed from a tragic misunderstanding. The Herero men spotted by settlers had come to Okahanja to seek Chief Samuel Maherero's arbitration in an inheritance dispute. Adding to the irony, Maherero himself was not even present in the town that morning. This eruption of war was the culmination of deep-seated grievances. Just weeks earlier, in December 1903, Zern had summoned Herero leaders to a meeting at the German fort. There, he demanded they sign a treaty ceding significant portions of their ancestral land to German settlers. When the chiefs refused, Zern forged their signatures and declared the boundaries had been redrawn. This blatant betrayal intensified Herero resentment, adding to a history of exploitation and abuse by German settlers and officials. By January 1904, Zern had become a symbol of German oppression, and his impulsive actions that day escalated the region into open warfare. The conflict quickly spread across the Central Plateau. Armed with clubs, sharp objects, and fire weapons, Herero fighters targeted German farms and isolated homesteads. Settlers, including some who had employed Herero workers, were unalived in their homes. Despite the violence, Samuel Maherero sought to impose some structure on the uprising, issuing a directive to spare women, children, and non-German individuals. This order was largely respected throughout the rebellion. The German response was swift and ruthless. Settlers and soldiers retaliated with indiscriminate force, arresting and imprisoning Herero workers while attacking communities uninvolved in the rebellion. In Berlin, the uprising was exploited by nationalist factions and the press, which painted the Herero as savages waging war against civilization. Kaiser Wilhelm II, seizing the opportunity to showcase Germany's imperial strength, authorized a large-scale military intervention. By February 1904, the largest colonial army Germany had ever assembled was en route to Southwest Africa. Lieutenant Zern, whose rash decisions had ignited the conflict, was quietly removed from command and sent back to Germany in disgrace. Adding insult to injury, he reportedly took a Herero skull as a macabre souvenir. As the war spiraled, Governor Theodor Leutwein initially sought a diplomatic solution, drawing on his years of correspondence with Samuel Maherero. However, Kaiser Wilhelm rejected this approach, ordering Leutwein to mobilize 800 soldiers against the Herero in April 1904. The German forces encountered fierce resistance. At Oviumbo, the Herero ambushed the troops, plunging them into disarray. Under heavy fire and struggling to regroup, the Germans narrowly avoided complete disaster, retreating under the cover of night. This failure enraged Berlin, and Leutwein was relieved of his military command, replaced by General Lothar von Trotha, a man notorious for his harsh campaigns in East Africa. Von Trotha's reputation preceded him, and his appointment was met with apprehension by other colonial officials. Nevertheless, he was granted sweeping authority to crush the Herero resistance. Viewing the Herero as subhuman, von Trotha sought their total extermination. With reinforcements arriving steadily, he devised a strategy to encircle the Herero at the Waterberg Plateau, where tens of thousands had gathered with their cattle. On August 10, 1904, von Trotha launched a devastating assault on the Waterberg Plateau. At dawn, German artillery opened fire on the sleeping Herero encampment. Despite mounting counterattacks, the Herero were overwhelmed by the Germans' superior firepower. Breaking through German lines on the southeastern flank, the Herero fled into the unforgiving expanse of the Omahique Desert, where their ordeal only deepened. For General Lothar von Trotha, the confrontation at Waterberg was merely the start of his campaign of annihilation. He ordered all water sources in the desert sealed off, with German patrols stationed to prevent any Herero from returning. Deprived of water, thousands of Herero succumbed to dehydration in the harsh desert heat. At dawn on October 3, 1904, von Trotha formalized his annihilation intent with the issuance of the Vernichtungsbefehl, or extermination order. Written in a crude form of pidgin, his proclamation declared, "I, the great general of the German soldiers, send this message to the Herero people. You are no longer German subjects. You have committed of life-taking and theft, disfiguring wounded soldiers. Now, out of cowardice, you refuse to fight. Whoever captures a Herero chief and delivers him to one of our stations will receive 1,000 marks. For Samuel Maherero, the reward is 5,000 marks. The Herero must leave the land. If they do not, they will be forced out with cannon fire. Within German borders, every Herero, armed or unarmed, with or without cattle, will be punished. I will not accept women or children. They will be driven back to their people, or I will order them to be unalived. This is my decision for the Herero people." To punctuate this declaration, 2 captured Herero men were terminated by hanging before the German troops, sending a chilling message. This marked the beginning of one of the first state-sanctioned annihilation campaigns of the 20th century. Von Trotha then initiated the Aufklärungspatrouillen, cleansing patrols tasked with systematically eliminating scattered groups of Herero across the region. These patrols targeted not only combatants but also civilians, including thousands of Herero who had no involvement in the uprising. Spread across the remote northern and western parts of the colony, these individuals were hunted down mercilessly, as von Trotha's orders left no room for negotiation or mercy. The extermination continued unabated until November 1904, when disease and logistical challenges began to weaken German forces. In Berlin, Chancellor Bernhard von Bülow, concerned about the international repercussions of Germany's tactics, especially in light of earlier atrocities in East Africa and China, insisted on halting the extermination policy. Under diplomatic pressure, von Trotha was compelled to withdraw his order, though he did so with open disdain. In the meantime, Kaiser Wilhelm II had dispatched Count George von Stilfried to evaluate the situation. Stilfried, a military officer under von Trotha, recommended an alternative approach. Rather than extermination, the remaining Herero should be disarmed and confined to concentration camps to serve as a forced labor force. This strategy was swiftly implemented. Survivors were rounded up and interned in camps across the colony, with the largest located in Windhoek, Swakopmund, and Lüderitz. Conditions in these camps were appalling. At Swakopmund, prisoners were crammed behind barbed wire fences, housed in makeshift shelters of planks and cloth. Crowded together, 30 to 50 individuals per shelter, detainees faced grueling forced labor under abusive overseers. Malnutrition, exposure, and disease claimed the lives of nearly 40% of prisoners within 4 months. Despite efforts by some missionaries to raise awareness about the inhumane conditions, German authorities viewed the camps as tools for the systematic eradication of the Herero people, leaving only a diminished population to serve as laborers for colonial expansion. Amid this unfolding tragedy, Hendrik Witbooi, the venerable leader of the Witbooi Nama, resolved to resist. Troubled by reports of the Waterberg massacre and von Trotha's extermination campaign, Witbooi anticipated that the Nama would be next. On October 2, 1904, just before von Trotha issued his extermination order, Witbooi sent urgent letters to fellow Nama leaders, calling for a unified resistance. By November, the Nama had declared war on Germany. Employing guerrilla tactics, the Nama forces launched ambushes that strained German resources. Meanwhile, Jacob Morna, a Nama leader known as the Black Napoleon, conducted his own campaigns, skillfully coordinating raids and strategic withdrawals to evade capture. His resourcefulness earned him a fearsome reputation among German forces. The conflict dragged on, but the Germans struggled to maintain control. Exhausted by the war's demands, von Trotha requested relief from his duties in October 1905. His request was granted, and he returned to Germany, where he was awarded a prestigious military honor and praised by Kaiser Wilhelm for his service. Around the same time, Hendrik Witbooi was wounded by shrapnel during a German convoy harm. He succumbed to his injuries 3 days later, at the age of 75. His death marked the decline of the Nama resistance. Leadership passed to Witboi's son, Isaac, and other figures like Morna and Cornelius Fredericks, who continued to fight valiantly but faced mounting challenges as German forces adapted their tactics. By November 20, 1905, Samuel Isaac, alongside other elder Nama leaders, opted for negotiation over prolonged resistance. Their surrender to German forces marked a pivotal moment in the conflict. Isaac, seeking to preserve his people, believed he was acting in their best interest. However, the promises of fair treatment from the German authorities were quickly broken. Friedrich von Lindequist, the newly appointed colonial governor of German Southwest Africa, prioritized expanding settler territories and advancing the colony's economic infrastructure. Upon assuming office, von Lindequist exploited the Nama surrender to pressure other factions into submission, using Samuel Isaac's decision as leverage. Promises of leniency and freedom were offered, leading thousands of Nama, including the remaining Witbooi faction, to surrender. By early 1906, they were marched to Windhoek under false assurances, only to be confined in concentration camps alongside Herero prisoners enduring appalling conditions. Many Nama prisoners were sent to Shark Island, a desolate and deadly concentration camp. Here, disease and starvation claimed lives at an alarming rate, with up to 20 prisoners dying each week. Out of the approximately 2,400 Nama incarcerated on the island, only about 500 survived when the camp closed in April 1907. Among the survivors were Samuel Isaac and his family, though their suffering remained immeasurable. The German administration seized Herero and Nama lands, dividing the territory into parcels for German settlers. By the early 1910s, the colony experienced a brief economic boom following the discovery of diamonds. However, this prosperity was short-lived, as the outbreak of World War I in 1914 drastically altered the region's fortunes. German Southwest Africa became a battleground, with British and South African forces invading to dismantle Germany's colonial empire and seize control of its resources. By mid-1915, the colony fell to South African forces, marking the end of German rule. While diamonds continued to be mined, the wealth generated benefited the new rulers, leaving the indigenous Herero and Nama further marginalized. Samuel Maharero, a prominent Herero leader, evaded capture by fleeing to British-controlled Bechuanaland, now Botswana, along with a small group of survivors. He lived out the remainder of his life in exile, passing away in 1923. His remains were later repatriated to Namibia, where he was buried in Okahanja. Today, annual commemorations, known as Herero Day, honor his legacy and the resilience of his people. Jacob Morna, often called the Black Napoleon, continued his resistance until September 1907, when he was ambushed and unalived by South African forces collaborating with German troops in the Cape Colony. His death signaled the end of organized Nama resistance. The atrocities committed against the Herero and Nama peoples during this period represent one of the earliest genocides of the 20th century. German colonial forces systematically sought to annihilate these communities, punishing them for their resistance to imperial rule. Estimates suggest that up to 80% of the Herero population, approximately 80,000 individuals, were unalived, alongside around 10,000 Nama, half of their entire population. Smaller groups, such as the Damara and San, also suffered significant losses, although their numbers remain less well documented. Efforts toward reconciliation have been slow and contentious. In October 2007, descendants of General Lothar von Trotha visited Namibia at the invitation of Herero chiefs, offering a public apology for their ancestors' actions. For decades, Germany resisted acknowledging the events as extermination, citing the term's absence in international law at the time. However, on May 28, 2021, Germany formally recognized the atrocities as extermination. Foreign Minister Heiko Maas issued an apology and pledged 1.1 billion euros in aid to affected communities. Despite this gesture, many Namibians criticized the agreement, arguing that financial aid alone was insufficient. Calls for the return of ancestral lands and greater restitution continue, underscoring the complexities of reconciliation and justice. And there you have it, the devastating story of the Herero and Nama genocide, a chapter in history that must never be forgotten. What are your thoughts on Germany's recent acknowledgement and the fight for true restitution? Let us know in the comments. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the bell icon to stay updated on stories that reveal the hidden truths of history.